Welcome to Class 2, which will be an intro to the Silhouette interface, as well as some instruction on shot approach and how to make a solid roto plan for your shot. So I'll begin by giving an introduction of the Silhouette interface. So when you launch Silhouette, you're going to get this screen, and you have some choices to make. You can either load in an existing project, and those are the last 10 that you recently opened, or you can choose the Open Project button and navigate to your project there, or you can select New Project and create one, and that's what we're going to do right now. And after I show you how to create a new project and load in some footage, I'm going to then close that out and open up a saved completed project so we can have a more in-depth tour of the interface. Okay, so now you can see I can name my new project. We'll call this Intro Demo VO1. And I'm already in my projects folder for this shot. So if I wasn't, I could browse, but looks like I'm already here. So I'm going to create my new project. And now we're going to load in some footage into our sources window here. And there's several ways to do that. Into File, Import Media. You can click on this lower left icon, which is Import, or you can double click in the sources window itself. So I'll double click, and I'm already in the directory where my footage is, and you just want to make sure that you're going to select the first frame of your sequence. So I'll open that up. And now it's listed inside my sources window. And I just want to mention that you can have multiple sources of different resolutions and different clip lengths in your projects. Okay, so now we will create a new session, and there's several ways to do that. I want to make sure that my source is selected. You can either go up to Session, New Session, or Command N, or you can click on the session icon here, New Session, or you can actually drag your footage into the trees window over here on the right. But I'm going to click on the session icon down here, New Session. And now you see we have the New Session dialog box. I'm going to give this a name, call this Intro, because you can have multiple sessions inside your projects. And I'm going to choose a template. I'm going to choose Roto because that's what we're going to do today. And I'm going to choose a streamlined workspace. And the streamlined workspace is really good because it reduces the trees window and makes room for the object list here, which is where our shapes will be. And you can go through and look the rest of this dialog box here to make sure that the rest of the information is correct. So it looks like it's my resolution's there, my aspect ratio, length of my shot, frames per second. I have my start frame, and I have my bit depth. So I'm going to choose OK. And now you can see that I have my source up here in my trees window, and then a roto node and an output node. And up here you can see is the session selection pull down. See, I could have multiple sessions here, but I just have one, and that's called Intro. And here we have some icons. So this is like the overview, so I can either click that on or off, and I can see if I have a large project. Sometimes I can navigate around in this window to see different parts of my tree. Here, if I click on a node, I can extract it. If I don't want this, I can just take that out, and that's no longer in. I'll just put that back in. And here I can disable a node or just click D. So if I don't want to see something in my process or in my tree, I can just click the D key, and you can see there's a red X that goes over the top of it. Enable that again, and I can load in nodes or I can save nodes. So that is the trees window. So here I have a completed shot, and I'll cycle through the alpha overlay and the alpha matte. And now we can play it through. So I've separated out the various landscape depths into color-coded layers. And in this particular shot, tracking was applied to each layer to speed up the process. So up here in the trees window, you can see that I've built my tree with the source node, the roto node, the slap comp, so I can see a test of my work, and my output node. Let's talk a little bit in general about nodes. So you can see around the border of the nodes, there are these input and output connection bars, and they are color-coded to make them easier to use. And you hook up each node to each other with these little wires, and you just choose which input or output connection depending on the operation that you want to perform. So if I click on the Roto node, you can see that nodes in general have a node parameters window. And there are other object or other windows associated with each node depending on the kind of node that they are. So when I'm clicked on the Roto node, you can see it has an object list associated with it. And inside the object list are my layers that each contain my shapes and my track. So, and I've also turned off my tracking shapes here with the eyeball, so you just see my shapes. If I have this rock point here, and I have a different tracking information applied to it, then I can separate out my tracking data in the different layers into the different areas on the rock. Okay, so let's go down and we'll talk about the nodes. Here is the nodes window down here, and it shares the same panel as the timeline window. So Silhouette has 146 different nodes, and they're organized into these different categories. And over here we have the Favorites tab. So if there's a node that I use all the time, I can select it and star it and add it to my Favorites tab. For example, if I use the Tracker node all the time, I can choose the Tracker node here, I can star it, and then I can see now that it's added to the Favorites tab. Or if I can't find something that I'm looking for, I can go to the search bar over here and I want to see how many different kinds of blur nodes there are. I type that in and it brings them all up. So that's really handy. So then if we want to add nodes to the tree, there's several different ways to do that. We can either grab a node, so if we want to color correct, and we drag it over, and if we hover in between two nodes where we want to put it, and we see the blue bar highlighted, the blue wire, and we let go, it's added there. You can also double click on a node and bring that in as well. So if I wanted something below the Roto node, say if I want to do some paint, I go over to Silhouette tab here. I have my paint. If I double click on this, first I highlight the Roto node and I double click and it adds it right below the Roto node. But if nothing is selected here, I can also add nodes that way. So you can see it was added unattached. And another way to add nodes, if I just right click and I have this contextual menu and I can bring up a node that way. So those are all the different ways to add nodes. And we'll just get rid of some of these before we talk about the timeline. Okay, so we'll go back to our Roto node. And I will bring up the object list here, which contains all our layers and our shapes and our tracking data. So if I go down to the timeline window here, which shares the same panel as the nodes window in the Streamline workspace, you can see I have all my layers and my objects, and I have my transform keyframes here as well. You can pan around holding down the space bar. You can zoom in and out using the scroll wheel. And here is where you can edit your keyframes. You can delete them, you can move them around. It's a good way to see all of your information for all of your shapes. I can collapse and expand layers down here. So I can see everything at once. And you can also see that I have a lot of different colors in my my timeline here, and that's because I have a preference that's called colored timeline tracks, and I'll show you where that is. I'll go to Silhouette Preferences. You can see in the user interface, I have colored timeline tracks selected. So if I didn't have that selected, I'll deselect it, click Apply, and OK. You can see it's a little more monochromatic, but I like to have the different colors because I find it easier to work with. So I will enable that preference again. Click Apply. And OK. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the viewer. Up here we have a new feature called Onion Skin, and that's if you want to see your animated paint inside the viewer, and here are some of the Onion Skin options. If I enable that, you can see the parameter box here, but that's for paint. Here you can see the snapshot icon, so you can do that to compare different views, and we have either the toggle the snapshot, vertical split, or the horizontal split. And here we have the display options, and I can toggle that on and off. So if I toggle that on, you can see that I have this information up here. And so this is the color space pull down. So this mine is set to sRGB, and that is automatically set when I make my session. So it's a good idea that when you create your sessions, you have your source selected, then it will interpret the color space correctly. And these are the other different options for color space. And then we have the view Xform and the LUT. So if you are working with a custom OCIO or a custom LUT, you can load those in and have them made available to you here. And then we have the gain and gamma sliders for the viewer, where you can change the viewer so that you can see your footage a little bit easier to work on. You can either use the pop-up and change it here, or you can use the arrow keys, or you can use the slider. And if you hold down the command key when you're sliding along here, you just get a finer adjustment. And if you just want to reset, you just click the little box here, which is the reset button. Okay, next we have the ROI, which stands for region of interest. And I'm going to disable the display icons right here. Okay, so now we're in the ROI. So this stands for region of interest, and you can see it's brought up this box around my image with little handles on it. So I can drag those in, and what I'm doing is I'm making a temporary crop. So the reason why I would want to do this is that maybe I have a shot that has lots of frames and I want to be able to load in more frames. Or I have a high-res shot and I want to improve performance. Or I want to, optimize playback. So there's lots of different reasons why you would want to use an ROI. So I've moved my border in, and now you can see I have a crop. So that is really handy if we just want to focus on a smaller area. So you can see down here, I'm going to talk about this box down on the lower right, and we're going to do a little experiment. You can see I've loaded in 136 frames here, and on the right side of the slash it says 336, and that is how many frames I can load in with the memory that I have assigned to Silhouette. And you can see I've used up 40% of the memory. But if I double click on this, you can now see with the ROI that I've made, which is smaller, I can now load in over 2,000 frames. So you can see that's a good way to see how you can increase how many frames you can load in. And I want to show you how you can animate the ROI. So let's go to the first frame here, and I'm going to set a keyframe. So I have an object that's moving across the screen. I just want to focus on that, and I don't want to make an ROI that's all the width of my shot. Then I can just animate my crop. So I will click this button up here, and that sets a keyframe for the ROI. And you can see it right here. And you can also see it in the time bar right there. It's a yellow tick right there. So then if I follow my object and say at the end I'm just about here, I can just drag my crop window in like that. And when I play my shot, you can see that the crop is following my image. So that is really handy. So another part of the ROI is called the DoD, and we'll just talk about that briefly. First, I'm going to reset my ROI. So here, there are all these different boxes up here, and what this is the region of interest box. And so say, even though I manually set it with these handles, just like that, I just want to mention that you can also type in certain dimensions if you have a specific dimension that you're trying to meet. So I will, you can set it there, but I'm just going to cancel that. And here is called something called the domain of definition. And we'll just talk about that briefly. It's where if I had, say, an oversized clean plate or something, a larger sequence inside my session, I can set my ROI to that size, and that will make the area around my normal session available to paint on or roto on or do other operations with. But we can talk about that later. Okay, so let's go down the line here. You can see this is the magnifier icon. If I click on that, I can see this area to the right here. I can see a magnification of where my cursor is. So you can see if I'm on the mountaintop here or down over here, it's magnified inside that view. And so this tool is available to you if you're in the reshape tool or you're in the paint or tracking modes. So it's great if you want to place a track marker somewhere, you can see exactly where you're placing it. But I tend to keep it off because I find it a little distracting. Okay, and then this is the Show Format Mask button. If you have a particular format mask that you want to work with and it's loaded in, you can use it there. And this is the Stabilize icon. So this is a really important feature. If I click on this, I can see that I have any layer that I've applied tracking data to is available here. And it's categorized by node and layer. So you can see that I've applied tracking data to all these different layers. And that's really helpful for rotoing, for painting, or other operations inside of Silhouette. And there we go, we'll turn that off. And here we have the rotate. So if you want to rotate your image while you work on it, then you can click that button, you click on the hand, and that is how you set the rotation. So say if I wanted to work a 90-degree angle, I set it there, then I can do my work. I can roto at 90 degrees or paint, and it can be very helpful. But we'll go disable that. And next we have the tool overlay. So this show tool overlay lets me temporarily turn on and off my shapes or other objects inside the viewer. So if I want to see my image a little bit clearlier, I can just turn that on and off, and I can use the 0 is the hotkey. And I use that all the time. And here we have a little graphic, just so as you can click on RGBA. We don't have an alpha channel for this footage, so there's nothing there. And then we can click the top bar, the white bar on the top, just to reset it to RGB. The other hotkeys are like Alt-R or Alt-G, etc., to cycle through. And here we have the alpha overlay opacity. So besides just the black and white matte, you can see your alpha overlay on your image. And to see that, you have to cycle through with the A key. So here we have the alpha overlay. And if I wanted this to be more opaque or even a different color, because you can set the color in the preferences, you just change this to a higher number. But I just leave mine at the default. And if I click A again, there's the alpha key. And here we have the aspect ratio correction button, which I don't really use much. And here we have the zoom pull down. So there's many different ways to zoom in and out of the viewer and to pan. And in fact, I think we're going to, let me open up the user guide and we can look at the keyboard shortcuts for that. So I love the Silhouette user guide. And it's available when you're inside the program. You go to the help menu, user guide. And I'm going to do a search for, actually I don't have to do a search. I can go down here to the keyboard shortcuts. So you can see here, if there's something I don't remember or I want to find out, what is the keyboard shortcut for the viewer, it's listed here. And you see you have all these options available to you for zooming, panning, and every other feature that has hotkeys. Here we have the timeline keyboard shortcuts as well. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the area up here on the top left of the viewer. The far left one shows the active node. So now you can see we're in the Roto node, which is the active node over here. And the view output are the different options that I have available to me while I'm in the Roto node. So I can look at the color comp if I want. It's like a little gray test. I can go back to the output node. And then we have the update pull down, which is a pretty standard. We have drag, adaptive release, and manual. But I keep mine on drag, which is constant update. And here we have the proxy pull down if you want to work in a proxy mode. But this plus button here is something where we can add a new viewer. So if I open up an additional viewer, it can be set to any node or view. So if I click on that, so now it's opening up a floating window that is set to the Roto node. But I can change this node viewer to any other node that's in my tree. So if I choose Slap Comp, I can now see my slap comp view inside this new viewer. So it's a floating window. If I want, I can dock it to the left and have it there, or I can undock it. And then another neat thing, what I like to do as well, is that if I want to edit something inside my window, my roto, I can see it update inside this extra viewer. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to zoom in here. And I'm going to click on a spline. So say if I feel like, well, maybe this area needs to be edited, something's off, I can move my shape and I can see it update in this extra viewer. So I really like that as a tool to help me judge my work and see how it's going. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to touch on here is that you can have multiple viewers from the same source, and you have this option of being synchronized in terms of zoom and pan by changing something in the preferences. So if I go back and I just move this to Roto, I can go to my preferences here. So in the viewer, you can see that I have synchronized viewers checked. So that means if I'm zooming in and out in my main viewer, I'll have the same action in my extra window. So if I hit apply and OK, I'm back in my window. And if I zoom in and out, that this other window is not changing with that. But if I wanted a synchronized view, go back up to the preferences. I click that, apply, and OK. And now when I zoom in and out, it's zooming in and out at the same time, or panning. Okay, so this is the end, the introduction to the Silhouette interface. In this class, I will go over shot approach and how to make a roto plan. Shot analysis and approach are important steps for an artist, and a successful visual effects shot relies on the foundation of careful planning. So while rotoscoping does play a role in previs, where it really comes into play is the post-production process when shot schedules are quickly moving forward. So here I have a 4K aerial shot of a Colorado landscape. I'm a little zoomed out, so I'm going to press the F key, which will fit my sequence in the viewer. And we'll play it through. So before I start out, I find out what elements will be added or removed, and are they practical or CG, and do I have access to them so I can see how they might fit into this shot. Maybe this will be a day for night one, or maybe a sky replacement, or maybe there'll be some elements placed in between the various cliffs and ridges. And ask if there's an animation take of the shot in progress and how close is it to final. And find out if there are similar shots in the sequence, and if so, what stage are they at. You want to learn if there's anything in addition useful from work already in progress. Lastly here, while it might be obvious for which type of matte that is asked for, such as a G matte, a core matte, or an articulate matte, it's never a bad idea to confirm. So can you tell I ask a lot of questions? And I do, but usually this ensures that I don't have to return to a shot after I deliver it. So I'm going to start playing it through again, and maybe I'm going to change the brightness a little bit. I'm going to go up to the gamma. I'm going to hold down Control Command and just slide that so I can have finer control over that. Let's bring that up a bit. Help me see my shot a little bit better. Okay. So, and in some cases, you might have very little information to go on, but even then you can still have a plan. And ask about the deadline or if there's any specified time bitted for your shot. And the more I look at this shot, I can see a progression of rock and landscape ridges all the way back. So what I initially thought was kind of a simple shot, it's a little more complicated. It's a lot more detail. If I zoom in here, you can see that we have this ridge here. We'll pan over, and then we have another ridge behind that, which is here. And then we have another ridge back here. Okay, next I think about if tracking will help me, and I always take that into consideration. Some quick testing usually eliminates that possibility, and my rule of thumb is 5 minutes to ascertain that. So Silhouette has 3 internal tracking options: the point tracker, Silhouette's own planar tracker, and the Mocha planar tracker. So if I go to my Roto node over here, you can see on the toolbar on the left, if I click here, you can see the tracker panel, and here's the point tracker, the planar tracker, and the Mocha tracker. And Silhouette also has the ability to import certain types of tracking files, and don't work in a bubble. Check to see if there's been any tracking done to your plate prior to you picking it up. Okay, so for this shot, since it's a smooth camera movement, I was wondering if I could just set a few manual keyframes and be done with it. But that was not the case, and I'll show my little test here. I'm going to zoom into this area. I go down to my Roto object list. I'm going to turn on this layer. And here I have a shape in black. I'll zoom in a little bit more. Where I've made some keyframes. I thought, well, let's just try it. So I made a keyframe on a frame where I thought it was pretty clear in frame and not too much distortion along the edge. I thought, well, I'll just try a few. So I made one here, and I could tell already, well, actually I went to the end and I made a keyframe there, and then I went in between and I could see it was off. And then I decided, well, I'll just go see what it's like here. And it's not only if, of course it's going to be off, but the shape changes a lot, and there's also some scaling. And if I go in between, I can see that it's just going to be a lot of work. More work than I thought. So I decided to pursue tracking for almost everything in this entire shot. So I played around a bit with the Silhouette planar and Mocha trackers and decided that a combo of those two would work great. So I'm going to turn off this shape here. Go back to fit in the viewer. Yeah, and the planar tracker seems to do well with locking onto the detail in the rocks and also identifying the outer edge. And here's an example of a final shot or a final shape. So I'm going to go up to this layer here where I have the point of the rock where I've tracked it. There's my final shape, and I'll turn on my tracking shape, and I've labeled it here in the object list called planar track. I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to go over to the tracker here. It's a good idea to label your tracking shapes to know which method you used. So keep that in mind as well. So if I'm in the planar tracker here, you can see my different options. And since this is already tracked, I'm not quite sure which feature pull down I used, but I think I used, I think it was the corners. And so this was great because it found the edges of my shape up here, and it found some detail in here. And so not only did it adhere to the edge, but the scaling was correct as well. So that was, so this has been a really great option for this shot. So we'll go ahead and I'll turn that off. All right, so then I decided how to break down each object into separate shapes. And for this shot, the larger objects, such as this whole screen left rock wall here, it has some perspective changes that needed more shapes because the trackers perform better when focused on smaller detailed areas than on an entire shape. So sometimes that alone dictates, all the different shapes that my object is separated out into. And then after that, I chose which frame to make each shape. It's ideally the frame where the object contains the most detail needed for a particular shape, and where it's in focus, let's see. And the closest you can get it without too much distortion. So here you can see I made my my shape on this frame right in the middle. So that worked out really well. Okay, so now I'm going to turn on all the shapes for this green left rock. And you can see how many shapes went into this object. I can select all those and turn them on. And now you can see all the different shapes. Okay, so next we'll go on to the roto plan. To make a roto plan, I refer to it as the 4 Ps: prior, proper, planning with prioritization. Okay, so as discussed in the foundations class, first decide on a spline type and ask how the work needs to be delivered, such as internal use, exporting of shape files, project files, or rendering out mats. It's best to first check with your team to see if there's a preference for the standard workflow. But you also need to keep in mind software compatibility if your work will be used in external applications. There's a chart provided with this course that shows cross-compatibility with Silhouette in regards to spline types and external applications with importing and exporting details. And then ask your team, decide, for your own shot completion plan, which objects are needed first, and start with those. It's really important to prioritize your roto tasks so that the roto is available at the appropriate stages. For example, if there was something going down here in this valley, we'll zoom in down here, then I would do the roto needed first for that area. This ridge line here, this rock, and this green left rock. Okay, now we'll turn on my completed shapes for this shot. They're already on for this green left off, so I'm going to shift select my layers here, and I'm going to turn on the visibility icon. And now you can see all my different shapes. And I've color coded them into the various depths of the shot for the ridges, just so I could kind of get an idea of how many there were. And it kind of helps me be a little more organized. Typically, I do roto with just all black splines, but having it this way is actually pretty helpful. So then again, we talk again about how do you break your object down into separate shapes. And not only do you think about that, but you also want to overlap your shapes with each other within the same object, so you don't have any strange gaps in areas like this. And you want to separate them out into areas that move independently of each other in terms of translation, scale, and rotation or perspective shifts. So that's mostly comes into play for lots of shapes when things are getting close to going out of frame. I probably would not make this all one shape because that would be kind of cumbersome to roto, and it would just change too much, and I might end up with some rippling or some chattering. And of course, I keep everything in layers over here. So if I want to expand and see everything in one layer, I can click on the layer, I can hold down the Shift key, and I can click the plus or the minus button, and then that expands every single thing inside my layer. And there's a lot of layers. And I can actually do that for everything in the object list. I Shift select, hold down the Shift key here, and then you can see it expands every single layer I have inside, and I can just collapse those back up. Okay, so I got a little ahead of myself here. So not only do you want to think about being organized with your shapes into layers, you want to think about things like point placement. You want your points to be placed in areas where they will facilitate smooth animation, and they should remain in that location on the shape throughout the keyframing process, because this will prevent rippling along the edge. If I somehow move some of these points over here, like to a different part of this ridge line in a keyframing process, then you just see them rippling or dancing along this edge, and that's never helpful. And then you also want to use as few points as possible. It does seem like I have a lot of points here because there is a lot of detail on these ridge lines, but yeah, you just try to find the optimum amount that will provide detail, but not end up with clusters of useless points. Okay, and so another thing here to think about is line placement. Where is your line going to go on your shape? So first of all, I just check with your team to clarify if there's a preference. Otherwise, just place the line on the last solid pixel of your object. And the most important part is just to be consistent, so that if the shape needs to be contracted or expanded globally, that it will be done so evenly. Okay, so lastly here, check your work before sending it off and put version numbers in any files that are exported. And if you end up making adjustments later, then just iterate your Silhouette project files. Okay, so this concludes the class on shot approach and how to make a roto plan.